Airlines tried shifting the blame, but they're the biggest cause of detainments. After condemning air business regulators for detainments and cancellations, airline assiduity leaders are now taking a more pacific tone. Airline directors, under a shower of review from the public, lawgivers, and Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, have sought to shift blame for flight troubles this summer onto the nation's air business control system. But civil data shows that airlines themselves are the biggest reason for detainments in recent months and bear responsibility for a surprisingly high share of cancellations. The figures, reported by airlines and released once a week by the Bureau of Transportation Statistics, also confirm the jests of numerous passengers. 2022 has been a rough time for air trips. Federal transportation officers say 161 breakouts were cancelled through May, the second most in the first 5 months of a time since 1988, outgunned only by 2020 during the emergence of the epidemic. The jump in flight detainments and cancellations stemming from surging demand in an assiduity that exfoliates knockouts of thousands of workers during the epidemic, urged unusual rounds of public cutlet pointing beginning this spring. It came as the nation's airfields were recording their busiest days of the epidemic period, egging unequipped airlines to boost worker pay impulses and shear back schedules. The assiduity's review of air business regulators sparked disconfirmations from the Federal Aviation Administration and Buttigieg, reminding passengers of their rights to refunds when airlines cancel breakouts or subject passengers to extended detainments. While air business control officers admit their own epidemic period challenges, data suggests that those issues haven't played a significant part in this time's airline struggles. According to the Transportation Department numbers, air carriers were directly responsible for about 41% of detainments through May, a figure on par with last time but advanced than before the epidemic. Late arriving aircraft, another problem substantially attributable to airlines, reckoned for a fresh 37% of detainments. Problems with the nation's airspace, similar to traffic, bad rainfall, or staffing at air business control installations, are reckoned for 17% of detainments, the smallest position since officers began tracking the data in 2004. Extreme rainfall is its own order and is reckoned for about 5% of detainments. As for cancellations, problems attributed to airlines were cited in 38% of cases, the loftiest rate since 2012. But the maturity of cancellations involves circumstances beyond the carrier's control. The rainfall was cited in 55% of cases. Public airspace problems, similar to those involving air business control, are reckoned for 7% of cancellations. Buttigieg said there are signs that air trip is getting more dependable, indeed, as cancellation rates continue to hang above respectable situations. What I've emphasized to the airlines is we want to support them when they're doing the right thing. We're also then to apply the rules when they're not, he said later. Anytime there's anything under FAA's control, they will work on it, but I want to be veritably athwart then that isn't explaining the maturity of detainments. Experts said the disagreement between airlines and air business control presumably reflects a desire by assiduity leaders to spread the blame after months of difficulties. Elderly numbers in the assiduity this once week gestured that they're ready to set aside the disagreement, striking a more pacific tone. In a Thursday earnings call, United Airlines Principal Superintendent Scott Kirby said he'd tete-a-tete apologized to Buttigieg after an internal company memo appeared to fault air business regulators for numerous of the carrier's tardy breakouts. "I suppose the whole system is strained," Kirby said. "There's tight staffing far and wide, and that's a part of it. It's not unique to the FAA. It's everything in the whole frugality, and clearly, a big knob of effects that touch on aeronautics are tight." Sharon Pinkerton, elderly vice chairman for legislative and non-supervisory policy at the trade group Airlines for America, added, "We really aren't interested in engaging in a cutlet-pointing exercise. We're concentrated on collaboration and trying to make sure that we're all concentrated on the effects that are going to ameliorate the functional trustability. There are signs the labor issues that have agonized the assiduity are perfecting. Southwest Airlines employs further people than it did before the epidemic. Delta Airlines officers said this month that the company has hired 000 people since 2021 and its pool is 95% of pre-pandemic situations. Airlines and the FAA routinely communicate to manage the nation's skies. Air business regulators and airline directors meet nearly every autumn to plan the coming days' breakouts, with other meetings at least every 2 hours throughout the day to partake updates. Former FAA Director Michael Huerta said former incidents involving the pressure between the agency and airlines were resolved behind the scenes. In public, both have generally tried to show consistency, he said. There always is a pressure between what the system can handle comfortably and what the carriers might want to give, said Huerta, who led the FAA during the Obama administration. The fact that pressures are being vented intimately reflects a sense of frustration on everyone's part, he said. Controversies began erecting in April when airline leaders sought a meeting with FAA officers to address air business control issues in Florida. Demand for trips to the state is roaring, with several airfields seeing further breakouts than before the epidemic. Space launches have also surfaced as a source of traffic. The meeting involved a dozen airlines, private aircraft drivers, and FAA officers over 2 days in early May. The FAA pledged to add workers to its busy Jacksonville Air Business Control installation, which agency numbers show had low staffing situations. In a late June letter to Buttigieg, Nicholas Callio, Principal Superintendent of Airlines for America, said one of its members reported that air business control issues were a factor in 1/3 of the carrier's recent cancellations. While rainfall also was a factor, Callio wrote that air business control staffing issues have led to business restrictions under blue sky conditions. In a memo to workers after the July 4th vacation weekend, United Superintendent John Reutman estimated that further than half the carrier's detention twinkles and 3 diggings of its cancellations were because of FAA business operation enterprise, which had been particularly acute in Newark and Florida. And while he conceded that numerous of those detainments stemmed from rainfall, air business volume and staffing are also contributing. The reality is that there are just more breakouts listed assiduity-wide than the ATC staffing system can handle, particularly in NY and FL, the memo said. Until that's resolved, we anticipate the U.S. aeronautics system will remain challenged this summer and beyond. The memo drew a sharp response from FAA officers. It's unfortunate to see United Airlines conflate rainfall-related air traffic control measures with ATC staffing issues, which could deceptively indicate that a maturity of those situations is the result of FAA staffing, the agency said in a statement, adding that while there are lapping factors that affect the nation's air system, the maturity of detainments and cancellations aren't because of staffing at FAA. The FAA said there were no air business control staffing issues on July 3 and 4, yet airlines canceled further than 110 breakouts, a quarter of which were operated by United. Jeff Guzzetti, a former functionary at the Transportation Department's Inspector General Office, examined flight detainments and offered recommendations on reducing their goods on guests in a 2013 report. He said the causes of detainments are complex, adding that it can be tough to nail down what each of those contributing factors is. Indeed so, he laid the blame for the bulk of recent cancellations and detainments on airline operations as the nation has begun arising from the epidemic, a time when demand for trips has soared. Michael McCormick, an adjunct professor at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University and a former FAA functionary, said the rise in detainments and cancellations reflects a trip demand beyond what the assiduity was prepared to handle. The airlines don't want to be the one association holding the blame for what's going on in the system and are saying the FAA, you partake blame in this, he said. Air business control issues are surely a part of it, but I would not characterize them as the major bone. While airlines exfoliate workers as people stopped flying in 2020, the epidemic's goods on the FAA's pool were less severe. FAA documents show it lost about 500 air business regulators between September 2019 and September 2021. That has left some major installations with staffing toward the low end of what the agency estimates is needed, according to a recent FAA staffing study. The union that represents conservation technicians also says staffing figures have fallen in recent times. The FAA hired 509 regulators last time but is seeking to add 020 more this budget time to help rebuild its staff, a process that involves times of training. There are certain topographies, especially Florida, where the impact of COVID on our training channel really did affect the Air Business Association, Buttigieg said. Airline directors have also refocused on airspace around Newark Liberty International Airport as being especially worried. United has cut breakouts there to get a better handle on its operations, a process in which Kirby said civil officers have been a dependable mate.